Good afternoon. I'm Stephanie Shulo, Vice President and Chief Legal Officer at MSA, the safety company. MSA is a safety equipment manufacturer headquartered just outside of Pittsburgh in Cranberry Township. For over 100 years, we've made products to protect workers, equipment for our firefighters and first responders, advanced air purifying respirators for industry, emergency preparedness and stockpiling, and products for critical infrastructure projects like hard hats and fall protection. We support over 2,200 employees, retirees, and dependents within the Commonwealth. And we are excited to sponsor this important panel as part of the Chamber's 2020 virtual Washington, D.C. fly-in. Nish Vartanian, our CEO, is the chair of the Allegheny Conference Infrastructure Committee. So our company knows well the vital importance that transportation, infrastructure, and connectivity plays for a region's economy and quality of life. The discussion the Chamber has put together today brings together leaders at the federal level, together with the leaders at the regional level, which of course is right within the sweet spot of the Chambers to bring together this public-private sector stakeholder conference. While of course we look forward to a time when we can be together with our elected officials in person in Washington, D.C., our purpose for convening today remains the same. We look forward to working with key public officials at all levels on these issues because we know that we must all work together to remain competitive as a region in this space. It is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to one of the key political leaders on this issue as both Allegheny County Executive and Chair of the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission, Rich Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Stephanie, and it's good to be with you all. Thank you. Thanks for Matt and Stephanie putting this together, and thanks to Nish for his work on for MSA and for the region on the infrastructure. Obviously, like so many things this year, this is a little different. We don't have the same camaraderie we normally do up on the Hill, and the meetings that we've had. But continuing to work together for these important issues, it's very important. I remember the last year when we were there, one of the great things we did with Christina Casotis and Congressman Lamb was push in a bipartisan way to get the build grant to talk about cargo and how important that is to our region. And I just think, when you talk about transportation and infrastructure, it truly is a bipartisan issue. This is something that really benefits everyone throughout the whole region, making our competitive nature, making us more competitive, vis-a-vis other cities and other regions across the country and across the world. We need to invest in our infrastructure. Congressman Lamb, I think, was mentioning it earlier, that these investments are going to be there. The needs are going to be there. They don't go away year after year by putting them off. So the quicker we can get to them and the more we can invest in them, the more quickly we can continue to see economic growth. This region has done a great job throughout this pandemic compared to other folks. The cooperation, about people wearing their masks, people cooperating at the business, allowing people to work at home and still be competitive through our construction phases and manufacturing and other operations. And, we've learned, again, working together is how we can get things done. I'm excited that Vince is here. You're going to hear from him, the new SPC director. He's got a lot of really good ideas, and the work he's been able to do at the federal level over the years will certainly help us all. And then representing the universities, Dr. Howard, they've been such great partners throughout this. Our chancellors and presidents of our universities are a huge part of how this economic, how we do economically. They're just such a big part of what we're doing. So, we've got some good things happening, that the BRT is moving forward. And again, Congressman Lamb, thank you. Being on the Transportation Committee is such a big boost for this region to be there. So, transit, roads and bridges, rail, our ports, our locks and dams, all of these things around transportation to move our products, to move our people, to get people to work are just so important. So I'm just so excited that we do bring groups like this together. There's so many that are participating today. And I know working together, I know over the years, the Tiger grants that preceded the build grants that we were able to do in East Liberty that helped so much to see what's going on around Google and some of the things that are happening around Bakery Square with Phillips Respironics, the Cary Furnace that we're starting to see investment there. And then of course our Civic Arena site. Those 3 Tiger grants have been instrumental in us moving forward. So when we come together and work together in a bipartisan manner at the federal level, at the state level, and locally, there's nothing we can't do. We know we have a lot of needs when it comes to transportation and infrastructure, and I think we can get there by all of us working together. So Stephanie, thank you. Thanks to everybody, and really appreciate the group coming together, and I'm looking forward to hearing what the panel has to say. Thank you.
Thank you, County Executive Fitzgerald. We appreciate you helping to kick off this panel. I know you've been one of our steadfast leaders to always join us in DC each year as we discuss our regional priorities, so we really appreciate you joining us today. So welcome again to everyone, and thank you for being here. I am Jen Beer, Vice President of Government Affairs with the Greater Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce, which is the advocacy affiliate of the Allegheny Conference. Just once again, a thank you to all of our sponsors who have made these virtual fly-ins possible, and to this panel's sponsor, MSA, the safety company. A few just quick housekeeping items before we jump into our discussion this afternoon. We did design these panels to be interactive and to have you, the attendees, be able to have questions answered. So please do utilize the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom window. We'll do our best to get as many of the questions that are submitted answered, or at least to have a variety of different issues for the panelists to discuss as possible. So hopefully you all know that for this panel, we will be discussing the vital role that infrastructure investment plays in our Pittsburgh region, and also how important these investments are and the many different areas that can help better connect everyone in our region to opportunity. So without further delay, I will introduce each of our panelists one at a time and ask them to give a few brief comments on how their work, organization, or industry views transportation and infrastructure investment, and maybe touch on a little of what their vision might be for the future of the region in this space. So first, I would like to welcome and start the conversation with Congressman Conor Lamb, representative from Pennsylvania's 17th U.S. House District. The Congressman, who serves on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, has been a great ally for our region on many different T&I issues. Congressman, thank you for your leadership, partnership, and for joining us today. And please feel free to offer a few introductory remarks.
Thank you, Jen, and appreciate everybody joining the call. I wish we were doing this in person in DC like we always do. But this will have to be the next best thing. I'm excited about this topic. A lot of you know I was able to join the House's Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure in the past year, and so I really am hoping to play a role on how we can improve this. I look at it as a generational type of thing. You know, my parents and grandparents' generation built up Western Pennsylvania to make it a great place for jobs, a great place to raise a family, a place that I could benefit from. And I think we owe it to future generations to do the same thing. A lot of you have heard me give the example before of my first campaign when I talked to these folks that make giant steel products that are so heavy that there's only a certain way they can drive them from Pittsburgh to the Port of Philadelphia, a distance that takes them 900 miles because of the restrictions on the road and bridge weights along the way, even though it should only take 300 miles for you or I in our own vehicle. 3 times the distance and 3 times the transportation cost just to move their goods to market across our state. There's plenty of other examples with the locks and dams, for example. Shell put the cracker plant where it is because it needed river transport. A lot of its construction equipment was too big and heavy to take any other way. And so they worry night and day about the Montgomery lock that's almost 100 years old and literally has a giant crack running through the concrete from top to bottom. I bet every one of your businesses has a similar story of some critical piece of our nation's infrastructure that is essential to the way you do business and really could use some upgrading and reinvestment. And it's true across the entire economy. I think 2 points are crucial right now. One is that there's a very, very strong short-term case for big infrastructure investment as soon as we can get it. And that is that in this time of the pandemic, we have much higher unemployment than we have had in a long time. And we all know, if we're being honest, that a certain percentage of those jobs are not going to come back to what they were before. We've seen a massive acceleration in business trends of various kinds that means the makeup of our workforce going forward is just going to be different. And so if we want to sit on our hands and let that happen naturally, it could take a decade or more. And a lot of people will suffer and be underemployed and underpaid in that time. The government has the ability to step in and create millions of jobs by building infrastructure in the short term. And what's important to know, at this time in history, the United States government is borrowing money at a negative interest rate day to day. Now, you may not like that for other reasons, but high unemployment and a negative interest rate are practically ideal conditions for us to invest in infrastructure. We may never see this again, at least for a very long time. And so there's a window of opportunity here to stimulate the economy in a middle class way, in a way that's distributed geographically, so that not all of it is happening on Wall Street with the type of things that the Fed does. Not all of it is happening in the hottest metropolitan areas where people have real estate and a lot of personal income. We can't do it through income taxes. A lot of the problem is people who are not earning income or not earning enough. So infrastructure addresses a lot of our most immediate short-term needs. And then I think we have to think long-term. Every business right now is competing on the world stage. It doesn't matter what they do. There's a reason that China is building infrastructure, not only in its own heartland, but across all of Asia, around the Pacific Rim, trying to get multiple ways into Europe, multiple systems, rail lines, gas lines, all that stuff across Africa. It's because this really is a contest for dominance in a different kind of economy in the 21st century. And I want Pittsburgh companies and I want American companies to have every advantage they can. If we can eliminate that 3 times transportation cost for any American company, we have to do it. You know, if we can make your internet faster, make your grid more resilient, make your stormwater system less likely to overflow, we have to do it. We cannot have these self-inflicted wounds any longer because the competition is too tough. It's not the same as it was last century. And our peers know this, and this is why we have to make the investment both for the short and the long term. So I know we'll have questions. I just kind of wanted to weigh in on how we're looking at it now. And thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. Okay, I'd like to welcome and move to another great partner and leader for our region, Christina Cassotis. Christina is the Chief Executive Officer of the Allegheny County Airport Authority. Thank you for being with us, Christina. Feel free to offer some remarks.
Great, thank you. I want to thank Matt Smith for inviting me to this panel. I want to thank the Chamber and the conference for all the work that you're doing. And I really want to thank Congressman Lamb because I think he pretty much nailed it. I think he could just give my talking points and roll right in from his to ours. We've got great projects for infrastructure investment and lots of opportunities to put people to work. This is something that the county executive and I spend a lot of time talking about along with our board because it's such a high priority. So I want to thank everybody, Congressman Lamb and the entire federal delegation for all the work that you've done on our behalf in Washington and for all the support that we get from our partners, especially from the county executive. We do have a lot going on at the airport despite the pandemic. We are busy. We've been doubling down actually on our business strategy, which we laid out in January. And I know that seems like a lifetime ago, but actually because of our strong plan, coupled with our vision and mission that is always focused on what we can do for the community, we've actually been able to have success even now. We had some very exciting news this morning, which I'll share in a minute, but our plan is a 5-year, 5-point strategy that focuses on our terminal modernization program, again, big infrastructure investment, technology, cargo, real estate development and economic development, and our workforce. And all of these things we've been making progress on, despite our passenger traffic being down 70%, which is pretty incredible. So first, the terminal modernization program, simply put, we need this now more than ever. We were too big before, we're much too big now. This was always about right-sizing the facility, not expanding capacity. And this terminal was built for another time and another purpose. And we really want to make sure that it's fitting the needs for this region. It also allows us to cut the costs for the airlines. We need this airport to work better, to be more in line with our role as an origin and destination airport, and to be a showcase and a showpiece for all that the region has to offer, including technology, innovation, and culture. We were at about 60% design when COVID hit. We are at 90% design now. We took some time to look at what we would want to in a post-pandemic world, knowing that this could be the first facility to open in a post-pandemic world. So we have been working with public health groups and experts to do everything we can to be pandemic proof. And this is exactly the type of infrastructure and stimulus project that we think is incredibly important right now. And of course, we would love the federal government's help in getting it done. The terminal project is actionable. We are ready to put shovels in the ground. And that is incredibly important to everybody to understand. The other thing I wanted to tell you is that this morning, just a couple of hours ago, Cathay Pacific, an international passenger and cargo airline based in Hong Kong, just landed at Pittsburgh International Airport for the first time. And it is part of an international all cargo route. It came from Ho Chi Minh City to Hong Kong to Pittsburgh nonstop. And that's going to continue twice a week for the next 12 weeks. We did that. We recruited Cathay by using all the fundamentals that we usually use to recruit passenger airlines. So we actually flipped our strategy from going after passenger airlines to cargo airlines. This started when we saw that FEMA was starting to bring in PPE equipment into the major cargo facilities, and we wanted to be one of them. So we worked with FEMA and national airlines. Again, thank you to the delegation for that help, so that they could begin shipping critical PPE to battle the pandemic through the airport in Pittsburgh. And actually that PPE was coming in from Seoul, South Korea. So we are seeing a shift from passenger to cargo globally, and we're positioning ourselves in this region for logistics. And one of the things that's going to be very helpful, of course, is that Congressman Lamb and the entire delegation helped us in securing this $18.7 million federal build grant that will allow us to build a brand new cargo building. And we actually are just about to enter into design on that. The last initiative I just wanted to touch on, of course, is Neighborhood 91. This is also infrastructure, and this is essentially leveraging private investment to build an epicenter of additive manufacturing right next to one of our runways. And this is all about condensing and connecting all elements of the additive manufacturing supply chain onto one campus, which is going to save those folks a lot of time and money. And we actually have announced our master developer, and we're about to announce the building. The first building has actually been sold out in a pandemic. And then actually one more thing, and that's our microgrid. This goes to resiliency and how important we have been finding that our natural gas is to the airport, not only for what it's done for us from a revenue perspective, but also because we will now be the first airport as of next summer to be powered entirely with our own energy from the natural gas and from solar. And this is really important from a resiliency and a redundancy perspective. And that actually will be able to go out into our Neighborhood 91. So what I wanted to tell everybody is that we're still working hard to maximize the infrastructure assets, the airport assets, in order to do everything we can for the region. And we're very grateful for all the partners that have helped us along the way. And I look forward to hearing from some of them today. So thank you, Jen, and thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. That amazing initiatives going on there. So thank you very much. And let's move to introduce our next panelist. I'd like to welcome Dr. Chris Howard, president of Robert Morris University. Dr. Howard is here not only representing the university, but I'd like to make sure that I mention his great and very active work as a member of our Allegheny Conference Infrastructure Committee. So thank you for all that you do, Dr. Howard, and please feel free.
Thank you, Jen. It's an honor to be a part of this conversation. I'm also standing in for Nish because we look a lot like each other. We have the same barber and the same glasses, we often point out. So I hope that Nish, thank you and MSA for their partnership and sponsorship, and all the other sponsors that are using their coin and their time to make this panel a reality. And I want to thank my fellow panelists in advance for these great comments. I learned so much by jumping on these things and listening, and great news, Christina, across the board. Congressman Lamb, great way to lay and frame everything as usual. And Vincent, I know you're going to be as thoughtful as always. So I'm going to make about 4 points, quasi RMU, speaking in terms of higher education and region, and it'll tie in, of course, to TNI and my role on the conference on that committee. So just to kind of frame, I think about, Robert Morris University is kind of the midpoint for the 2020 universities going forward. And when I mean that, physically, we sit in such a unique place. If you were to put out your arms equidistant, you'd get Bakery Square with one arm and you'd get the Shell Cracker Plant with the other arm. If you went the other way, you touch Christina and you touch the airport. So we're kind of this little triangle of innovation and infrastructure and transportation needs and real upside. So as a university of 4,000 to 5,000, and as I'll talk about in a second, it's really gone big on Pittsburgh. It's Pittsburgh goes, so does our destiny as a university. We're delighted to be sitting in what they're calling now University Boulevard corridor, right near Airport corridor, not too far from the Cracker Plant and not too far from our compatriots at Pitt, Carnegie Mellon and Oakland, and that whole innovation corridor. So obviously transportation. Whether that be old school, making sure our roads and bridges are safe, as Congressman Land alluded to, but also innovative ways to get people out here. There are neat jobs in the university corridor. There are neat jobs in the airport corridor. Amazon's doing 1,200 jobs. Niagara Bottles has several hundred workers coming out here. Robinson has a big initiative with the pharmaceutical company. So transportation to get people out here to take courses at a Robert Morris and to be able to work in this area is very critically important that the Port Authority be supported in their efforts. They've been good to us thus far, but the more we can do to get people to come out here, I think the better opportunity for Pennsylvania and for Pittsburgh in general. The second thing I was going to say, this is one of those issues. It overlaps economic development, commercial development, higher education, and of course transportation. Is our UPMC Event Center. There's a project we did with many partners, people on this phone call right now. We're founding supporters of this. We got RCAP dollars. Thank you to Governor Wolf and both sides of the aisle and legislature. Here's a place where we went from 3,000 seats to 4,000 seats, from 60,000 square feet arena to 170,000 square feet arena, 11,000 square feet of conference center space, which serves our community quite well in every capacity. Ladies and gentlemen, in 9 months, we had 60,000 visitors to that place. 60, and that was just 9 months. Concerts, Bryan Adams, Bob Dylan, the Doobie Brothers, Cirque du Soleil. Unfortunately, Big Bird was coming, but COVID came first, so we would have had Sesame Street. And that's just the beginning, not to mention some great high school basketball and some great college basketball, where both our teams qualified for the NCAAs. Transportation makes that easier and doable. And it's a partnership that we're accustomed to in Western PA and Pittsburgh, and infrastructure and transportation make all the difference. As I said before, we're doubling down on Pittsburgh. So I did that study with McKinsey, the Allegheny conference, and what happens post-COVID. If we don't keep the infrastructure up and the transportation moving in the right direction, we're going to lose that luster. I've been in Pittsburgh 4.5 years, and I still talk to friends, and they'll say, I'll ask them about what's going on in Pittsburgh, and they'll say, God, something cool and edgy is happening in Pittsburgh. I'm not quite sure what it is, but I know it's pretty cool. So we've got that going for us, and that's nice. And if we let our infrastructure fall behind, if we let our transportation fall behind, public transportation and what have you, we're not innovative, and we're doing the project we're doing down there by Carnegie Mellon with the smart buses, and we're doing the things that Christina talked about at the airport to upgrade it. We're going to lose that edge. In the Nashvilles and the Austins and the Portlands are going to look more attractive than what Pittsburgh is. So all this is critically important. And here's my last point to everybody out there. And it's the other type of transportation. It's the information highway. And it's broadband and 5G. And I'll tell a quick story about what's happening on our campus and many campuses in the region, and how 5G as an infrastructure project will make a big difference. So as you'll know, many of our schools are teaching in this modality called high flex or virtual learning. Online is asynchronous. That's been around. Robert Morris has had that for a long time, as have many schools. This high flex model is because of the virus. We have to put half the class in the classroom when they're in there in person, they're masked or socially distanced. So a classroom that could hold 40 people, we can only have 20 people go to class on a given day. So what we've done is we've had on a Monday, group A would be in there, 20 students with the professor. Group B would be watching synchronously on their devices. We've invested in some infrastructure to in our classroom, some IT. So when the professor's teaching, there's real-time tracking. It's a very vibrant experience. So the other 20 students that are looking at their devices, their phones, their iPads, their desktops, their laptops, they're getting a very robust experience. And then after, on the Thursday, they'd switch. Group B would be in the classroom and group A would be out. Now think about it. there's no reason we shouldn't keep doing this, especially we're doing a project with the National Science Foundation with some of our rural community colleges where students want synchronous learning, but they can't come in every day of the week or come in as often as they like. What a great way to give them the best of the world, best of education in the palm of their hands synchronously by investing in 5G, which allows for the professors to put up their things that would be very difficult with a slower broadband or sort of coverage. So I think Vince might mention that as well, but that's another part of transportation infrastructure is 5G. I know Stephanie Pashman has been very aggressive about putting that out there. For higher education, it will help us be more competitive and more compelling. Thank you, Jen.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Howard. And I have a feeling we will get to that. And finally, I am happy to introduce and welcome the very newest member of the Pittsburgh region, at least from this panel, Vincent Valdez. Vincent is the Executive Director of the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission, which was noted earlier, that's our region's metropolitan planning organization. So Vincent, we welcome you to Pittsburgh. Welcome to this panel.
Thank you very much, Jen. I really appreciate being here. I'm very gratified to be here with this panel and hearing them speak about the future of this region. I'm also really very grateful to the county executive for bringing me here to this wonderful area and giving me the opportunity to be able to explore the art of the possible with what is certainly an emerging technology and an emerging way of practicing transportation. As you mentioned, I'm the executive director for the organization that at the same time that it's interested and working on multimodal transportation projects, it's also working on economic development. And that's one of the things that I really kind of want to focus on in terms of where we're going with the SPC. I think it's important to think about this and this region as really a crucible for innovation. And all of the panelists have used that word innovation throughout their presentations. It is about innovation. Congressman Lamb mentioned the importance of investment, and I would take that even further and say the importance of investing intelligently as well, that we need to make the right choices because so many of these systems and so many of these pieces of infrastructure are so expensive that we need to make the right choice. I've often said that innovation isn't necessarily about inventing a new technology or inventing some new gadget. It's sometimes taking something that exists and optimizing it, or taking something that exists elsewhere and bringing it to bear here, particularly in our region. And that's what I really want the SPC to consider is as we're working with our partners regionally, that we're bringing in ideas from around the country. I spent 20 years at the Federal Transit Administration, and I was for 13 years the Associate Administrator for Innovation and Research. And so I had the opportunity to really take advantage of seeing innovation across the country and actually around the world. And I can say to everyone listening, we are standing at the verge of a new era in terms of mobility. And I use the word mobility very specifically. It's beyond transportation. We value mobility because of what it does to actualize our lives, that we get to the things that we need to get to, whether it's a doctor's appointment or a job training program or education, that there are societal outcomes from every trip that we take. And so as a community, as a society, we really value that mobility. And the transportation is the means of getting that mobility. And so I want certainly SPC to be part of that calculus as we think about ways of innovating in this region. I love what Christina said earlier, talking about this region being a showcase. If I can do one thing for the SPC and for the region is to make this a showcase. Dr. Howard mentioned the idea of other cities being competitive. Again, I look to the Columbuses or the Kansas Cities, and I see Pittsburgh as having a competitive advantage over those cities, and that I want to see that come to the fore. It's a wonderful region. We have incredible potential here, and I'm excited to really exercise that potential. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you. All very great, inspirational introductions, so thank you all. Let me now invite the panelists to please feel free to turn on your videos and we'll get started with some Q&A. A reminder to the audience that you can submit questions via the Q&A chat button at the bottom. And I will kick it off. with an issue that has already been addressed, but this issue of broadband connectivity and potentially 5G as well here in our region. So we obviously know that the current COVID crisis has shown the importance of broadband and connectivity in all areas. We've touched on them all: school, work, healthcare, everyday mobility options. And at the same time, we know that we have to get ourselves in a good position to compete economically as we recover from this pandemic. So having 5G will be very helpful. So maybe Vincent, I'll start with you, since I know, I believe you wrote your thesis on the topic of developing intelligent transportation systems. And I've already heard you say a few times in meetings that we've been in that broadband is a new mode of transportation.
Yes.
Offer maybe a little bit more of your thoughts in depth on your vision for the region in this area, and also really how to balance the 5G and the broadband through an equity lens.
Well, I think, and thank you for the question. I think it's important that we understand that broadband really is the new transportation mode, and we need to look at maximizing investments in that. I think COVID has really kind of ripped bare the need for that connectivity. At the end of the day, whether it's mobility or connectivity through broadband, you're really looking at access. The real core here is access. Access to societal benefits, access to prosperity, access to all the services that are offered by our society. And at the end of the day, that's equity. If everyone has the equal opportunity to get to those services, to get to those networks that support our lives, then we need to make sure that we're doing that in an equitable way. And that's perhaps where broadband comes in. Obviously, we've got a region that is both urban and rural. And I'm seeing already a need in rural communities for increased broadband. And the question becomes, how do you get it out there? And I would dare say it's through partnerships. Again, it's not so much the technology that's driving the issue here. It's the partnerships that make that broadband accessible and available to all of the communities, whether, again, a densely urban community or a rural community. And so as we start to think about investments in our infrastructure, I think as a nation, we really do need to grapple with what we do at a national level to make sure that broadband is covering all of our communities, ex-urban, urban, suburban, what have you, because it's become too important, as has been recently revealed.
And I also want to make sure this is very flowing as a dialogue. So if any of the panelists want to jump in, Dr. Howard, your thoughts from the university perspective?
Yeah, I mentioned a few things before, but I love what Vince is saying in terms of equity. I was in a conversation about 20 university college presidents and chancellors a few weeks ago, and I was talking to I think the president of Boise State was there, and she was talking about how different it is in her state in terms of who has access and who doesn't have access, and later on it'll be who has the 5G sort of the best access versus those that don't. Thinking about the exacerbation of disparities in terms of wealth and social mobility in our country, some of it exacerbated by race, always exacerbated by income. This is the next. This is when we talk about what we want to do post the killing of George Floyd. These are the things we need to do. When you look at the communities in Pittsburgh, the schools that are having the challenge getting those laptops or the iPads are the same ones that have a problem having access to broadband. It's a humanistic thing. And I think that Vincent hit the nail on the head. But also, I'll leave on a very positive note, the opportunities are boundless. We do, those of us of a certain age remember all of our science and engineering being done in labs, some of them dark, some of them lit, whatever. So much of that stuff is being done virtually now. Some of this is because of the COVID-19 pivot, but in the future, our ability to pump out high quality, near real time, really highly detailed, data dense education and training modules through 5G and broadband anywhere in the world, anywhere in our community, whatever, it's going to be a game changer. So I echo what Vincent said, and it's an equity issue, it's an education issue, and it's an opportunity issue. So, and again, back to our brand, when you're for those that have students come visit your campus, they always look at how's your Wi-Fi? When young people look to locating in Pittsburgh, they say, how's your broadband? Are you 5G? If you're not 5G, I'm going to go someplace else.
Yeah. And how about Christina, for the airport? What's the connection? No pun intended, but can you offer some thoughts?
Well, it's something that we're actually working on quite actively. We do think that there are a lot of opportunities for us to take advantage of what this means. Again, if I go back to thinking of the airport as the front door to the region for millions and millions of people a year, and how do we make sure that whatever is happening in the region is showcased first and foremost at the airport? So it's the first impression for a visitor, it's the last impression for a visitor who's flying in. So we want to make sure that if these are the conversations we're having to try to figure out what the use cases will be. We have lots of them. It's now a question of prioritizing them. And we want to make sure that we are known for pushing the innovation envelope and being at the forefront of 5G, because it's going to be so important for so many different industries. Right now, aviation has a lot on its plate. This probably isn't its first priority today, but it's something that we're tracking and making sure that we're ready for.
Great. Congressman, any thoughts on federal investment in this area?
Yeah, I'll just be very brief to give a sense of the scale of what we do. We put $100 million with an M into the CARES Act this spring to try to address that immediate need of getting better internet access to people in areas where it's hard to have it, especially for kids. We found out that a lot of those projects couldn't even be built in the year 2020, but $100 million was considered significant. In the infrastructure bill that we passed in the House over the summer, we put $100 billion with a B, because there's that much work to be done around the country for the long term. So it's that important. 5G is promising in a lot of areas, but people need to remember that one of the reasons it's so expensive is because they're also kind of, the more rural you get, the more you still have to lay fiber cables. It's just the nature of the technology. And so buying up those easements and actually digging and laying the stuff is still very, very expensive. And it's the reason that private companies, don't do it like we want them to, because there just aren't enough people there for them to make it profitable. But we have a small agency in the Department of Agriculture called the Rural Utility Services that knows how to do this. And so that's kind of who we're giving money to. But it's the scale of the problem is in the hundreds of billions of dollars, I believe.
Great. All right, thank you all. Let's change gears a little bit. Congressman Lamb, I have a question that we'll direct towards you that I know many of our attendees are wondering about the likelihood of the Highway Trust Fund being extended, and if so, how long, or any insight into maybe a larger infrastructure package, probably or possibly at a later date. So any thoughts on what's going on in DC?
Yeah, specific to the Highway Trust Fund, everybody knows there's a problem. It doesn't produce revenue exactly like it used to. Right now, we see the most likely path as maybe a 1-year extension where we move some money from the general fund into the Highway Trust Fund, and maybe reauthorize the FAST Act to just do roads and bridges at kind of a bare minimum level. It's not what we want, but it's probably what we can get right now. And my point with infrastructure is always sort of pay now or pay later. So I think we should pay now for that stuff. Like I said, we passed the major infrastructure bill in the House over the summer. It was called HR 2, had trillions of dollars of investment in roads and bridges, in water systems, in electrical grid stuff, electric vehicles for the Postal Service, electric vehicle charging stations, stormwater, and flooding remediation, rural broadband, like I mentioned. So the kind of blueprint is there. And I think in the debate for that bill, I saw a lot of interest and willingness by Republicans to help us fine tune that for the areas that they represent. Because of some of the larger political dynamics, they didn't support it, and it wasn't going to go anywhere in the Senate. But I left with the feeling that in a different political context early next year, for some of the reasons that I mentioned about unemployment and the availability of credit, we're going to have an excellent shot to go back to the drawing board and do that. I just think you need the leadership of a president that wants that as their number one thing. And the current president just hasn't done that. So it's made it hard for Republicans in Congress to follow. But I think that may change coming into next year. So I'm optimistic. And between now and then, if you want to talk to me or my staff about the basic framework and things that should or should not be in there, please feel free to reach out to us anytime.
Thank you. That's great. Christina, I know in your introductory remarks, you talked a little bit about the terminal modernization plan to make us a truly post-pandemic airport, but can you give maybe a few examples of changes you either have made or are considering and the need for any federal investment around that?
Yeah, well, we're always happy to take federal investment, and we're always happy to demonstrate why federal investment would pay off. This program, the terminal modernization program would put about 10,000 people to work really quickly. And we think that's a good thing. So it's another reason that we're really bullish on the project, is not just what it does for the industry, but what it does for the community immediately in the short term to act as a stimulus. So as far as what we're looking at for post-pandemic, I can tell you that there were so many options that we actually broke them down into now, near, and next. So what can we do right now in order to deal with the pandemic in a large, complex facility like ours? How do we make sure that we're doing everything we can to instill confidence in staff and travelers, right? That's the most important thing, is that for the people who have to travel right now or choose to travel right now, that they feel that they are being taken care of in our facility, and that we're working with the industry in terms of sharing best practices, because we're all part of an ecosystem and none of us exists on our own. If you come to the airport, you're likely to get on an airplane and off at another airport. So we have a number of initiatives that we're actually in the process of studying, have everything to do with reporting and making sure that people understand what's happening from a wellness perspective and a health and safety lens. Of course, I've talked about in previous conversations about the UVC robots, that the autonomous floor scrubbing robots that Carnegie Robotics has put out at the airport. And so that was one of the things we were able to do immediately. How do we step up, double down on cleaning, make it more visible? How do we let people know what's going on with air quality? Those are the things we can do right now. When we get into near and next, there's everything from hand washing stations as soon as you come out of security to different air filtration systems for the new terminal. How do we ensure that we can socially distance if we need to in the future? There's a lot that we're looking at how it will impact design and operations. So it's ongoing, and as we get closer to 100% design, we'll be talking more about that.
That's great. Thank you. Dr. Howard, I know we talked recently about how COVID has made transit a bit of a double-edged sword lately. But could you talk a little bit about the day-to-day role for transit and transportation for your students and campus? And I know you talked a little bit already about it being a draw for the competitiveness issue. So just touch a little bit on that.
Yeah, I'll take that on a couple different levels. I'll start with the students first. So first and foremost, Pittsburghers don't like to cross bridges, so we need to make sure they're safe so that they don't have a bad experience when they do choose to cross the bridge. But in all seriousness, public transportation, I've had great conversations with our transit authority about this. It opens up a world to folks in Western Pennsylvania to come to a place like Robert Morris and vice versa. That is just different if you don't have it. And there's a dynamism that you see in places like Boston or New York or other places, some of the bigger metropolitan areas, that is very, very useful. In addition, it also makes it better for us to circulate our talent here in terms of our staff and faculty. Pittsburgh's a place where if you want to get into the education game, you can, half my staff I stole from Carnegie Mellon, they stole years ago, and half of it they're stealing back from us. And you can live in the same place and do that. So because of our infrastructure, our roads, and our public transportation, we provide opportunities that are very, very important and useful. Christina there as well, when we bring in a faculty member to wine and dine he or she quite often the first thing they see is that airport. And, you know, and as she does what she's doing out there and the great work they're doing out there to take it to modernize and right size that facility, that's the first thing they see. I mean, and we interview and hire a lot of people. The first thing they see is the airport. And so if you want to attract talent, retain talent, grow your talent pool, all these are the telltale signs of a modern, you know, kind of a 4.0 type of city. So there's a couple of things that make it very, very important to us and my colleagues in higher education.
Great, thank you. Vincent, let's turn to you. What are some of the things, I know you mentioned a couple of other MPOs, maybe Columbus earlier, that you're looking to, but any others throughout the country that you're eyeing or perhaps you know, looking to in terms of modeling your vision for the SPC?
Great question. And I don't think there's an MPO out there that I'm not eyeing at this point for best practices. Again, I'm here 3 months and I'm really kind of very interested in energizing the SPC and really kind of making this a destination, this region a destination. I'm really taken by what Dr. Howard was saying about transit and the importance of transit. As I said, I worked at FTA for 20 years and transit is very kind of a core value for me. But I'll give you a little bit about my background and then it'll answer the question as to what I see for the SPC and what I'd like to do for the region. So as you all know, and as you know, Jen, I'm an urban planner, but I'm also, before I was an urban planner, I worked as an engineer, as an aerospace engineer. And I worked on military systems. I worked on Tomahawk cruise missile, F-16 fighter, and other similar systems. And what I brought from that world to the urban planning world is kind of a very practical hands-on approach, right? There's a saying in the military, know your why. Why am I doing something? Why am I trying to pursue X, Y, or Z? And if you think about military systems, again, I was brought up in that world, it's always with a mission in mind, right? And so what I would like the SPC to be is perhaps a test bed or perhaps a real energizer for bringing new ideas and testing them out here in this region and making this a showcase. Congressman Lamb mentioned the importance of federal funding and kind of a national framework. Where the rubber hits the road, no pun intended, is at the local level. And what we need to do in our region is make ourselves one of those test beds, one of those petri dishes for these new concepts and these new technologies and implementing them in a way that is equitable and effective for our community. There are a number of MPOs out there that do this already, and I'm looking at their practices for how we can do that here. A couple of the MPOs that I've been speaking to, for example, literally dedicate 60% of their resources, their time, their people to doing actual projects and demonstrations and pilot projects at the local level in order to prove out and to bring into effect new ideas for transportation. I'd very much like to do that while also maintaining the practical things that we do as an MPO, our tip planning, all the things that we do as our baseline of functioning. So again, put that innovation at the forefront while maintaining, our ability to do our basic work. So that's one of the things that I'm looking at. I attended, while I was in Washington, D.C., I attended a number of lectures around D.C., whether it was the Brookings or other organizations. And I always found it interesting that there were economists who were talking about globalization and talking about how can we protect economies from that globalization, because again, corporations have become very mobile. And one of the things that came out of those discussions that I took to heart is that you really need to support regionalism. I think Christina mentioned that this become a region that is a destination for corporations, that this become a region, as Dr. Howard mentioned, that people want to come to because you have all of the infrastructure, all of the networks, and all of the underlying systems that make for a vibrant and livable community, whether in rural areas or in the city, that the entire region has sort of inoculated itself from the effects of globalism, if you will. And I think SPC as an MPO can play a role in that.
Very interesting. Okay, thank you. Congressman Lamb, I'd like to switch gears now a little too to our rivers and waterways. You've been extremely supportive in this area. I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of a status update on the funding for the Upper Ohio navigation system in the, was it Emsworth, Dashiell, and Montgomery locks and dams?
Sure. And I think Marianne might be on this call. If she is, I want to just congratulate her and all the excellent work by the stakeholders when it comes to the waterways and locks and dams. And the chamber itself has been a really powerful voice, always calling attention to that issue, which I really appreciate. I know it's not necessarily top of mind for every one of your members, but our whole region relies on these waterways and the ability to navigate them. So the big challenge when it comes to lock and dam funding is that there's only a certain amount of it every year and more projects than there are dollars. And so what ends up happening inevitably is that they piecemeal out the money to different projects, probably in part due to congressional influence, and none of them get built in as fast or an efficient manner as possible. So they all take a long time and they're all over cost and kind of no one's happy. So these projects are funded with a mix of dollars from the federal government budget directly, and then from the tax or user fee that the barge operators and people who use the rivers pay on every gallon of their fuel. And those users have actually voluntarily raised that on themselves in order to try to speed up the financing of some of these projects. But we're at the point now where we need to change the balance between those two things. It had gotten to about 50-50. And what we want to do is make 65% of the money come from the federal government, 35% from the trust fund, which will basically just make the money move faster and in larger amounts. And so we've worked for the last couple of years on trying to get that funding formula change into an important piece of legislation. We finally got it in, and it passed the House in the last month or so with great bipartisan support. Our office was able to get a bunch of Democrats and Republicans to come together on letters pressuring leadership to do that. We're successful. We think that this bill is also going to pass the Senate in some or very similar form. They're negotiating it right now as we speak. So it could be one of those things that gets wrapped up either right before the election or right after. But if that happens, and now it's 65-35 instead of 50-50, basically our projects on the Upper Ohio will get pulled forward into the future and started earlier, and hopefully therefore finished earlier and at a better overall cost to the taxpayer. So, you know, at a time when Shell has one of the largest construction sites in the country right next to one of these locks, it's a pretty big win. And I just want to say again, everybody working together on it between, you know, Democratic and Republican members in Congress and the advocacy groups, the chamber, everybody has had a stake in this, and we just got to keep going and we'll get it over the finish line.
That's great. Thank you so much again. We really appreciate you've been a real leader on this for our region, so thank you. Here is a question for all of you, and maybe more of an opportunity for the Congressman to hear the other panelists' thoughts, but what support would you each say is vital from your industry or organization from DC in order to help the region really maximize our economy and our quality of life? Is there an issue or a mode of connectivity missing that we haven't yet discussed so far this afternoon that you wanted to make sure you brought up or that you feel is important? I'll just throw that open and see if anyone wants to take a first shot.
I think we've covered it earlier, but I think kind of a national framework for broadband. I think it's essential that we grapple with it now. As the Congressman said, if we delay things, they only get more expensive. But if we can craft a national vision and a national plan that is equitable and effective, I think that's certainly an area that would help certainly MPOs across the country grappling with the broadband question.
Christina, Dr. Howard, anything from your ends?
Well, you know, we've got a lot going on, and the Congressman. First of all, I'm thrilled that he sits that you sit on transportation and infrastructure. That's a big win for us as a region, and I appreciate everything that you did, especially with bringing together the delegation for support of the build grant. The timing is perfect. We're going to put it to good use. You know, our big focus right now is really on Neighborhood 91, and it's on the terminal modernization program. And it's making sure that we can act now, as I said, to make sure that we have the right infrastructure going forward and that we can put a whole lot of people to work. So, you know, that's a big issue from a federal government perspective, but I would say that just because of the nature of how airports are funded in this country, we all have to make sure that we're not going to, you know, delay any necessary infrastructure improvement for yet another 10, 20 years, because I think then we're going to be in trouble. So we've got a project ready to go. And to the extent that there's anything that we're missing at the federal level, we're certainly open to it. But otherwise, we just appreciate all the support that we do get.
I would echo primarily what Vincent said in terms of the broadband piece applying specifically to higher education. But as we talked about before this call officially kicked off, and that is, you know, and I like Christine calls it now near far. I use a similar methodology, Christine, with my board. Ford Motor Company employed that and how they rejiggered their product mix. I think it's a really good framework. But now for all of us is COVID-19. And so I know it's a little bit off topic, Congressman Lamb, but I tell you, a lot of unfunded mandates, a lot of risk associated with students coming back to campus that we're having to deal with. So as Congress thinks about its role in helping on CARES Part 2 or HERO, whatever the next is, on behalf of my colleagues, public, private, 2-year, 4-year, boy, we really could use that shot in the arm at every level, because it is rather expensive. And it's just an existential risk to many parts of higher education to get to this now, to get to the near. So again, Jen, thank you for, I know I'm a little bit off there. I'm sideswiping my buddy Conor on that one, but I had to put it out there because it's important for the next.
No, it's part of pushing along our economy and quality of life here. So I think that was just fine. Well, before I wrap up, any last minute comments that anybody wants to add, Congressman?
Yeah, Jenna, if I could just say, you know, one of the real pleasures of my job, I think, over the last couple of years has been to learn about all of the different ways that federal investment can impact Western Pennsylvania specifically and help us gain an edge going forward, which I think is kind of the spirit of the question that you just asked. And I think, to me, the way I look at it is there is going to be an industrial revolution in the next decade or two somewhere in the world. Someone is going to be building all the new electronic vehicles, not just passenger, but light and heavy trucks. Someone's going to figure out how to make a lot of them automated. Someone's going to build all of the energy technology. Someone's going to build the robots that do manufacturing, all of that kind of stuff. It's going to happen. It's really a question for us as policymakers is, do we want to sit on our hands and just sort of hope that it happens here, but maybe it ends up happening in China? Or do we want to aggressively go and pursue it? And I think that there's been a lot of really high quality leadership in Western Pennsylvania for a generation that has decided to go and aggressively pursue it. And so if you look at like all the Department of Defense money that flows to CMU for advanced robotics in manufacturing, and then connect that with the fact that we have pretty low energy prices on average because of the investments made in natural gas drilling over the years, much of which started in federal science labs, including the one that we have in South Park. And then you add to that the advantage of our lower real estate prices compared to peer cities and investment sites around the country, the fact that we are a little bit less impacted by climate change, a little bit less impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, which is no accident. We've had leaders in our health systems and our universities like Chris and others who've worked hard to put this region ahead. I see all of those things combined with our amazing higher education system that we have really making us a strong candidate to sort of jump up a tier into the top tier of places to invest in the United States in the next decade or two. But all of them rely on us being able as a community to continue promoting the difference between government investment and government waste. We can no longer be bogged down in this discussion of, is the government doing too much? Is the debt too high? Whatever. There are things that if we don't pay for them now, we're going to pay for it later one way or another. And so I think this whole discussion of infrastructure and trying to improve the airport, trying to get faster internet everywhere so that we can have the Internet of Things and 5G and more competitive campuses and more competitive factories and better jobs and a stronger middle class. It all sort of goes together with the idea that we need to make very smart investments, and we need to do it fast because other people are trying to beat us to it. And so I think that also carves out a nice space for some bipartisan accomplishment if we can somehow keep the conversation focused there, because nothing I just said has a very partisan bent to it, other than maybe the idea of spending some public money to help invest. But there are things that could benefit every family across our region. And so my biggest compliment to the chamber is that you guys have these events constantly and you talk about things other than taxes and regulation. You talk about investment all the time. You talk about infrastructure and locks and dams. Matt is constantly talking about NIH funding and the importance of biomedical research. And so I think you guys get it. I want to thank you for that. And I think together we really can help put this region in a strong position moving forward, no matter how bad things seem today. And I know they seem pretty bad.
Oh, thank you. Those were excellent closing remarks. We really appreciate it. Well, I know we're a little bit over time. Thank you to all of our panelists for participating in this session. We know how busy each of you are, so we are greatly appreciative of your time here today, but also as such great partners and leaders in this field to help advance transportation and infrastructure investment in our region. I would also like to reiterate our sincere appreciation to our sponsors, including MSA, the safety company who sponsored this panel, for their generous support that allows us to continue to work to advocate for our region. And thank you to everyone who participated on the webinar. We look forward to seeing you in our next session, which is at 4 p.m. today on sustainability and Pittsburgh's energy future. So thank you all again and have a great day.